Welcome to the Talent Edge Pitching, Pricing and Negotiation webinar. Thanks everybody for joining us on this bright and sunny day. And I'm sorry for those of you that aren't in Cannes, but this is obviously second best. Without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to our wonderful panelists who introduce themselves. And I do hope this will be something for everybody to have a few takeaways and a little bit of insight. I, for one, will certainly be learning how to price and negotiate against you lot, because I understand that, you know, you're often on the other side of our staffing negotiations, and helping you out with finance and commercial stuff is great. But if I can pitch and get better commercial from you, even better. Let's kick off then. John, would you like to introduce yourself to us?
Yes, thank you, Tracy. So good afternoon, everybody. John Cornwell. I, having spent a number of years at WPP or with Ogilvy, I should say, I'm now working on a fractional basis, and I'm working with a couple of agencies right now, one being Buttermilk, who are a community-first creator agency, which is a great space to be in right now. It's growing crazy and founder-led, so quite innovative in everything we do, which is fabulous. I'm also the commercial lead for an agency that launched literally 2 weeks ago, Ace of Hearts, which is incredibly exciting. You may have seen something about that. And both agencies are coming to market very differently commercially, which I find incredibly exciting, but perhaps that's for another day. And I'm also a board advisor for a fintech startup called Stream. So I guess that's what's keeping me busy at the moment.
Fantastic. Tia.
Hi, hello. Little John as a start. So WPP for 10 years, then Dentsu. Always a hybrid between innovation roles and management. So my last role was as global MD of iProspect. And then in the past 3 years, so my second phase of career has been very much in advisory and coaching, so especially one-to-one, but also group leadership development. A lot of it also with CFOs, so which has been interesting because I don't think that they've always been like in prime position to get coaching, and that has been a shift also that I've noticed in the market, and the questions and the goals that I've been working with them on, I feel have been very different from what was before, and I think hopefully some of that will come also.
Perfect. Tracy.
Hi, there's two Tracys on the webinar today. That doesn't happen very often. Other Tracy, I'm Tracy with an E. I'd love to introduce myself. I'm Tracy Shirtcliffe. I'm the CEO of a platform called Scope Better. I've been around the agency industry for nearly 30 years, which feels like a long time. And I've been in technology and platforms in that time. I was the original creator of a project management and workflow tool called Traffic Live. And my current platform is called Scope Better. It says what it does on the tin, and we define ourselves as a platform that helps agencies and professional services businesses to solve the pricing problem. So we are very specific in what we in kind of what we do, and kind of one of the key things that we do is we help those businesses that are suffering from the pricing problem to solve kind of inconsistency, the complexity within pricing, and remove some of the manual tools, all around kind of doing it in a smarter, kind of better way. And I'm delighted to be talking today because I love to talk to people in finance who are really at the sharp point of making decisions, or in my view, on what you should be doing commercially for a business.
Fantastic. Okay, without further ado, we will kick off properly. We're going to divide it into 3 sections, which is navigating client and internal dynamics. So a lot about the negotiation and behaviours. Then we'll talk a bit more about value and pricing models. And then we're going to talk at the end a little bit about, hopefully, the future of pricing and the commercial models. So lots to kick off with, but I'm going to start with Tia, I think. Tia, what are the biggest mistake agencies make in pricing negotiations, do you think?
I think this comes to as no surprise to anyone. There's a couple. One of them is pricing time. I think, and also when you work as a consultant, you know very well that the moment you put a price on time, you are capped no matter what you do. Like there's nowhere to go, right? There's only so many hours that every person has. And so the moment you start costing around time, you already give yourself a huge cap. But it feels like it's so hard for agencies to get out of that trap, but there are ways, and hopefully we can discuss that. So that's one. The second one is kind of like defending, being in a cost defending position rather than kind of conversation around value. So whenever there are conversations, is more around that kind of, the moment you start defending timesheets, cost, like how many people, head count and all that, you are in a defending position rather than actually open conversation that can lead to something. So moving that conversation from that defending cost position to discussing value is the second part, which is also linked to what I just mentioned around kind of the time capping that many agencies normally price themselves around.
Mm-hmm. Okay, John, would you add anything to that?
Well, I love the point you made in terms of leading with cost rather than value. I mean, I think that's something that we've all struggled with in all honesty, and we are starting to get there. Some agencies better than others, some geographies better than others. But I think with AI and how that's going to already disrupting our space, but certainly over the next couple of years, it's vitally important that we now make that leap. So I would agree. I think just in terms of mistakes in the negotiations, I think we're going to come on to some of that in a bit more detail. So I'll be careful with my answer. But I think because of that defensive point that you raised here, we find ourselves on demands on the back of demands from clients, and then we're trying to respond to those demands rather than really exploring what sits behind them. And if we explore what sits behind them, we often refer to it as interest, but essentially, what is it that the client's really trying to solve? I mean, ultimately, clients are buying solutions to business challenges from us. They're not buying competencies. They're not really buying services, dare I say it. They want to know if you've got the creative firepower, the strategic brains, the partnership, the chemistry to truly solve their business challenge. And the more you can have the conversation around that and understand truly because if they're trying to solve a business challenge, there's value in solving that challenge to them, right? If you ask the right questions, better understand the value of solving that challenge, then you can frame your approach to the negotiation, how you might price, and the model that then delivers on that very, very differently, to your point, rather than arguing around how many hours it costs and what rates you're going to charge and so on.
Okay, which sort of brings us on to the second point, which is in terms of how you prepare for that, and particularly with procurement, because procurement traditionally has been about cost, hasn't it? And it does come down to money. And certainly I find it very frustrating dealing with procurement because they don't almost care about the business outcome. They care just about ticking a box to save some money. So from your perspective, John, how do you prepare for commercial negotiations with procurement, and how do you incorporate some of those bits you just talked about just now in terms of the value rather than just making it on price from them?
Well, the one-word answer would be thoroughly. I don't think we as agencies typically spend nearly enough time in the preparation phase. I mean, at worst, it's you're sitting in reception about to be taken up in the lift and you're working out who's going to say what. I think we're perhaps a little better than that. But are we really investing the time up front? I mean, there are various stages to a negotiation, obviously, but I think planning is arguably the most important. And that ensures that you're aligned as a team. What that might be from what roles you're going to play, but the approach you're going to take, where you're fixing your price, or at least your opening price, perhaps. But perhaps more importantly, and without repeating what I just said, the types of questions that we're going to ask to truly understand what the client's motivations are, so that we can custom, our response accordingly. And I think a great thing to think about when you're preparing, just a couple of very obvious things perhaps, but think about options. You just mentioned price and procurement there, Tracy, but if you just put one price on the table, you shouldn't be surprised if that becomes the only variable. And before you know it, you get into this haggle or discounting, which of course isn't negotiating. So definitely think about options. I think another thing to consider is what's the minimum you're prepared to accept, often referred to as a walkaway point. That's something you should take into every negotiation. Obviously, you would always hope to do better than that. But if you put the right thought into your walk away point, then you should certainly never go below that. And as part of that, you then start to think about, okay, what are our alternatives if we can't reach an agreement? What is the alternative? And equally, what are the client's alternatives? Because we often think we are in the weakest position going into negotiation. Sometimes that may be the case, but very often clients don't have too many alternatives. They're very keen to work with us.
How do you know that? Because of
well,
that
I think
discovery
that's
phase.
through the questions. That's through the questions you ask. We know, I mean, there are some fantastic procurement clients we work with, absolutely wanting to partner with you, but they have a job to do. And I think we can't, sometimes I think we can be guilty of blaming procurement for, frankly, our own decision making. We can't blame procurement for asking for more and more if we continue to say yes and yes and yes. So we need to be a lot braver and a lot more confident in our position, in the value we bring to the table, and have the mindset and the, if you like, frankly, the experience, boldness, whatever you want to say, to push back and to say no, because they will keep asking until we get to that point. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think
it does. I guess the other thing is that how does, how do you decide on that walk away price? Because I think finance will have a very different price to some of the client teams, to the CEOs. Everyone's got a slightly different agenda there. So, how do those teams collaborate, during that kind of pitching, scoping process?
I mean, that's a good question, but that's why the preparation is so important, because then you're all in it from the outset. You understand the client's challenges, the model that you're likely to propose, and I guess the terms that are ultimately acceptable to the agency. And if you've been through that process together from start to finish, it's easier to reach alignment. But you're right, there is a conflict. If you think about it, most CEO, this is generalizing a little bit, but a lot of CEOs and client leaders, main priority, and rightly so, is to retain clients, they
want to win, don't they?
Etc. Yeah. A lot of the commercial and finance folk, main priority will be ensuring that the agency grows profitably. And I don't mean to suggest CEOs and client leaders don't want that as well, but those priorities can sometimes be in conflict, particularly when there's tension within a negotiating forum. So to ensure that you're aligned, it is vital. And I think if you can do that before things get tense, before things get difficult, before things get uncomfortable, then you're very clear on what you're aiming to achieve. It's less likely to fall apart in the room. Hence why that preparation phase is so important.
Right. Okay, Tia, what do you think in terms of how collaboration between commercial and finance teams and the client teams looks during the pitch, and also the scoping process? What's your thoughts?
Like in your question, there's also part of the answer, because there's a difference between if you're pitching and if not, right? Because if you're not in a pitch and it's kind of a renegotiation, and for me, even using the word negotiation probably just sets the wrong tone, right? Because it's almost like co-building something. And if you can see it from that perspective, then there are key people from the agency team, key people from the client team, including procurement, that get together and ask those questions. And they, to John's point on asking those questions to go deeper to the what you call it interest, I call the aspiration, right? They say that you don't get the right answer until you've asked 5 why questions, right? Why, what, how? Like, so the layers to get to that are quite deep, but normally you tend to stop at the first or second layer. So having those opportunities, which normally if you have a client, you will have. And so creating many touch moments where it feels like you're co-creating something together, a new model. In pitches, you have less of that time, but it's almost the question becomes, when you're preparing for that pitch with the procurement, with your own internal people on board, how can you recreate a shorter version of that so that you can ask those questions, those why questions? Because if we go back to that value, you can't define what value is just sitting around your table at agency, because the value will be different by client, and not just by the brand, but each person that is a client side. So having an understanding of that and then translating it internally for people and everyone aligning around that, then creates more of a North Star that everyone can go behind at agency level to try and solve that conflict. and I think the anchoring. So what our move, our walkaway point, that is very important, because very often you have that, but then because of what's happened in agencies in the past, there's always some way to unblock it, right? And it's like, oh yeah, we can get, there in a different way or whatever. And I think that then almost in a way breaks the trust, because is that our walkaway point because of a valid reason? And why are we using that different ways to get in there? And I think that clarity and trust should never be broken in a way, so that really what is the walkaway point, rather than a fake one and then a little buffer to get that you can get to in other
Are clients expecting that there's always a fake one first now?
I think partly yes, because of what has happened in the past, and having those conversations more openly, because agencies don't want to say, look, we're not getting those rebates anymore. We don't, we don't have other ways of getting the money that we could go to before. Very often you don't say that, you don't verbalize it. It's kind of there in the air. So clients do push it, because there is always a little bit that assumption that you can go a little further because you will find a way somehow. And sometimes you can't, right? And that's when things become really inefficient on a specific client. And then also make the conversations with clients less honest, rather than let's try and build something where we can all be successful, and potentially also co-invest in, which is a different way for an agency to participate in something that is not just, I'm giving staff to run a service here.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, you were a client side for quite a few years, weren't you? What does it look like from the other side?
Oh, that's a great question. I haven't had one of those for a long time. The client is often, I think, kind of quite removed for what happens inside the agency. And I mean, my personal opinion is that, the client teams who go off to a pitch spend an enormous amount of time on the pitch, probably I'd say 80 to 90% on the kind of the idea and the creative. And I think what it invariably has is the scoping and pricing is always left to the end. John, you've probably got, and Tia, you've probably got anecdotes of this as well. It's normally, 2:00 in the morning and somebody goes, oh my God, we've got the idea. It's fantastic. We put it all together and we're ready to go in the morning. Oh my God, what are we going to charge for this? So from my perspective, coming from kind of a client side and then going over building an agency and then working with producing a platform, anecdotally, the perception is it all comes together seamlessly. But actually what happens is, the creatives come up with the ideas, the client teams vet those. A lot of work is actually spent on the pitch. Very little time is spent on the commercials and certainly the pricing. And it happens very late in the game. And then there's a big panic. What do you think the others are going to charge? Who else is in the pitch? What are they going to do? And actually, sometimes that should be brought forward. I'd like to say that we're better than that, but that's genuinely my perception of what happens, that the pricing or the kind of the commercials certainly come very late to the party, and they should have equal weighting, and they definitely don't.
Okay.
Controversial, I know, Tracy, but
that's good. I love a bit of controversy. Okay, let's move on. In terms of price, we've talked about price, and I want to come on to this whole idea about value versus price in a moment. But first of all, in terms of price, you've got what you're set. You've done all your kind of proper information gathering, etc., and you've done your scoping. You know what your bottom line is. How do you hold the line on price when clients push back, particularly when you're competing with other agencies, other networks, and it did feel for a lot of years that it was all about price, and it was a bit of a race to the bottom, and it was all kind of, the industry was cannibalizing itself a little bit. So John, what's your tips there?
Well, sadly, I think some of that's still happening. So I don't think we're seeing the end of that. I guess it builds on what we were saying earlier in terms of anchoring the conversation, the value that you believe as an agency bring to the table. And I think that's probably going to come up a lot today, as we're all trying to move away from the more legacy kind of models. So to Tracy's point, it comes late in the day. We're building a staffing plan. We're looking at and you're immediately having the wrong conversation. So I think, okay, the client's pushing back. The first thing is what can you do to bring the conversation back to value? It's very easy for a client to push back because they have benchmarks that suggest your hourly rates are too high, or the time it's taking your agency to deliver is more than the agency next door, which may or may not be true, but that's the tactic they'll use in response. Whereas, again, if you start to explore the value of what it is you're doing for the client at any given time and ask the right questions, you can get a better feeling for what's important to them. That might then lead to more guidance around what their budgets are. Again, we talked briefly about options earlier, but if the client's really pushing back, put 3 options on the table, because what you do then, you immediately start to get value on the table. The 3 options will be at 3 different price points with 3 different sets of, whether it's deliverables, there are hopefully not, but labor type plans, or ideally something that's more outcome related. But whatever way you do it, you're establishing a range of values and the fact that there are different outcomes or sets of deliverables against each of those price points. And then you can start to explore priorities, perhaps what really are the budget constraints. And then you just get the conversation back to more of an even playing field, which will help move the conversation forward as opposed to a client just telling you you're too expensive. And if I may, and people have perhaps heard me talk before, that apologies if this sounds like I'm repeating, but I think it's really important. There is no question now that procurement play a bigger role within their organisation. They have a seat at the top table, they have a bigger voice, with certain companies and certain brands, and I don't think it's right that I suggest which ones, but there's no question procurement have sometimes a deciding decision, but a much bigger decision in the outcome of a pitch. I'm talking about new business here. But I still believe in the majority of pitches, if you're having detailed conversations with clients, this is around strategic assignments rather than more tactical, then the client organisation has already decided, let's do it 2 ways. They've either already decided that you're the agency that they want to work with, and procurement have been charged with going to get the best possible price because they want that agency. If that's the case, then why on earth would you discount? Okay. Or I think less likely, but they see some value in negotiating with you. You haven't won, but they see some value in negotiating with you because they can then use that as leverage against the agency that they have decided to work with. In either of those 2 scenarios, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever to reduce your price. And when I say reduce your price, I mean discount. Absolutely, there's a dance to be done with procurement, but we need to reframe. I think one of the you said about takeaways. Let's remove the word discounting and talk about trading. Trading. That's what negotiating is. So if you're going to have to move from one price to a lower price, what is it you're securing in return? Is it less a lower level of outcome? Is it less work? Is it in exchange for a longer term contract or some protection against inflation? Whatever it might be, but you should be trading at every point rather than just discounting. I think when clients push back, that muscle memory is there as agencies where we want to win, we want to please our clients, and before we know it, there isn't an agency I've seen yet that doesn't have some kind of pricing sheet which starts with the price and then all of the discounts they're going to give, in part to show the value of those discounts, which is good, right? To show the value you're giving to procurement, but very rarely are those discounts linked to securing something in return, and I think that's a real challenge for us.
And what are you talking when you talk about securing something in return? What sort of things are you talking about?
Well, it depends on the value of the give, right? On how much of a reduction you're making in price, but ultimately, if you're still delivering the same, if you're committing to deliver the same, let's try and talk about outcomes rather than anything else, then you should be securing something in return for that give, because ultimately that give is going to cost you something, probably margin.
Okay. Tracy or Tia, anything you'd add there? Because this is what we're talking about is a way to define value, aren't we? I suppose.
Exactly. So one of the things I was going to jump in is that, what you should be doing is not comparing apples with apples. Not all agencies are the same, and not all ways that you present your pricing should be the same. So for me, it's kind of like, if you look at it like, a pricing triangle on the bottom of that, and the biggest that everybody seems to work at the moment is kind of inputs, which is around kind of billable hours, time, materials, which I don't believe we'll get onto that later as a model for success. Then of course above that is kind of like how you describe the output or what it is that you deliver, which is, if you're packaging that as services wrapped in value about what you're delivering, then you're less about the billable hour, and it's more defensible about the difference that you have versus somebody else. Then of course, John's mentioned it, you move into kind of outcomes, which is the solution that you're providing, what makes you different, what's your methodology, your kind of processes of a business to get there. And then you can even go even further and kind of solutionize what you do, which is your special sauce, which cannot be compared to others. So the real challenge is taking kind of pricing, and maybe I look at it from a different perspective, because I come to all of this from kind of a, how would you get more, pricing determines profit. How can you actually do that as a process that gives you more value to your business? That's certainly how I would compare it. Don't start a conversation with procurement about billable hours, roles, and rates, because that is the way that the agencies have already got to kind of the lowest common denominator. So we need to push up about outcomes, solutions, outputs. Certainly, the easiest discussion is, this is what we deliver, not these are the people who are delivering it.
Okay, Tia, do you do anything in terms of when you're advising your clients how they define value?
Yes. So just on the trade-off, and that is, I think the trade-off is important also because of what we were saying earlier, which is if you are discounting something and you don't take something back for that, the question then is, why didn't you offer this discount in the first place if you could do it, right? But so it's also for those optics of like, yes, we can agree a different, but there needs to be something else that, gives there, and it feels more like, what are we trading here? I think also on the value question, it's because I've worked across both media and creative, and this is changing now. But on media is much easier to talk about outcomes. Because a lot of what you can measure what's happening, you put a search budget, so we can agree upfront what we're expecting as an outcome, and we can price around that, and value can be talked about around those terms. When there are more creative elements, it becomes much harder, but that's why the work that you need to do upfront is really important in terms of establishing what is that outcome that we're expecting from a creative process, and how are we going to measure the value? Is it that we have an ad that gets X amount of success once it hits the ground, or is that we have internally 3 viable options to judge, and we are happy with that and we consider that value? So the value can be very different depending on the conversation that we're having with clients. And also some clients will tell you, value for me is the fact that I can pick up the phone any time of the day and I'll get a point of view on this particular matter, or a second opinion on this creative idea. And that could be value for them, and they could put it right at the top, even if there might be not a clear outcome linked to that. But that's why that conversation and establishing between the two partners what are those things that are valued is really important. Because it might be that does not have a direct outcome, but if you take it out, you ruin that relationship with that client, and you go, head into a pitch as a result of it.
Okay, we've got a lot of finance people, CFOs on this call. How do they quantify and forecast value versus just a cost? That's a difficult thing for them, isn't it? Any takers on that one?
I guess. Sorry, go on. You go, Tracy.
One of these things, it's for me, it's kind of what is it that you price to the outside world, and what is it that it takes in your business to run and deliver that business. And I think what has invariably happened, and I think the model we've got to in pricing, certainly for inputs, time and material, was a lazy model. I know it sounds or feels difficult to move to outputs or outcomes, because there's going to need to be more work within the business to discuss that. But I think we've genuinely got there, because we haven't actually led from the front that says, what is it that we need to power our agency and grow, as opposed to what do we need to cover our costs. I think as a cost is not a word that we should ever use with clients, and I think that's the same with why we now define it as value. What is value? What is the term of value? It's how you package yourselves together on what you give the client as a reward for working with you. And I think that's really a lot of this is actually how we frame it and how we reference it. There's certainly things we can do, but I struggle with the communicating with the input to a client versus the output.
But even internally, you still have to quantify that bit internally in the business. Certainly, if you're a finance person, don't you? That's still there, whether you're doing it outwardly.
100%, but that, in my humble view, shouldn't be shared with a client. You know, we don't, in the creative world, we don't like the whole kind of productized approach. It's a scary word. Nobody likes it. But, you know, the irony being is that a lot of agencies work for brands who sell products, you know, and they have costs themselves and what makes up their products. You wouldn't walk into a Boots and compare one brand with another, you know, put together the costs of those two ingredients and say, well, I'm now going to negotiate with you against, you know, Nivea to Boots' own brand. Like, you wouldn't think for a second, like if you got to the till, somebody would start laughing at you. But it's not certainly what we take that as a way to work when we're within an agency business environment.
I think you're right.
Yeah. The fact that, you know, we could it is almost considered the way you do it, that the profit that you make is pretty much should be the same, right, across the board. But if we think about it, the profit that you make, it should be based on how much that client values the problem that you're solving for them, right? And there's this example that very often is used, like you can go to a dentist and they take 3 hours and not solve a problem, and you pay them like £200, and then you go to a dentist that in 30 minutes or 5 minutes solves you the problem and charges you 400. And then would you ever question them on the fact that you pay them 400 because they took 30 minutes? I mean, that's often how we talk about also what can you put on top of your, rather than the problem that I solved is so important to you, that is the value that you give it to it and that you are prepared to pay for, rather than what it cost me, because what it cost me is 20 years to become the greatest dentist that you can get there. And that partnership that I can bring to this, it means that you don't have to go and spend those 20 years and you get that expertise, which almost is like, you know, you can't put a value on, but you can, because it's the value that the client puts on that problem solving, rather than, oh, you should make a margin of 30%. And if you're making a margin of 50%, it means I'm paying you too much. Getting out of that equation of like, well, no, actually, because if this is solving such a big problem for you, then there is almost no limit to what you will pay for it.
How far are clients in that mentality versus you're making a 20% margin, that's too much? How, you know, it feels like that's a bit of a shift from the current situation.
Yes, it is. But I don't think it's necessarily, I think it was Tracy that made this point earlier. I think it's just because the way that it's always been, and that we have ended up educating clients in that perspective. Because if you can help clients with the questioning, right, and that we talked about, see what they put value on, that's, if you make a margin of 50%, but for them it translates into a 10x result that they're getting in an area that otherwise they would never been getting, then it doesn't really matter, you know, because the two things are not comparable. It's like what we're making is a bit like, you know, Meta now investing billions into some kind of AI companies that are going to power them up. Like, yes, they're investing that, but they're expecting like a 10x return on it. And I think that's what we need to drive the industry towards in order to get out of this. Otherwise, especially big networks will be struggling more and more.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Tracy?
I mean, one of the things for me is that I think agencies have probably more leverage than they are led to believe. Procurement teams are motivated and rewarded to push prices down. I think Don said it initially. You're scared to lose the business, so sometimes you're the more you need it, the more you'll be willing to negotiate. I mean, there's a lot of things at play. I just genuinely think that the commercial conversation can be had with more depth, and there's better ways to differentiate yourself than a rate card.
Yeah. Okay. I do want to come back a little bit to that though, because, you know, again, we've got lots of finance people in this in this forum. What role should they play in terms of shaping and policing those pricing decisions then? You know, where does we've talked a lot about value here, but ultimately there is a price, and how do finance balance their role in that? Who's going to take that one? John?
I think some of that is driven by the culture of the agency, in all honesty. But I guess there's two parts to that answer. One, I think, is stick with new business for a moment. And by the way, sorry, just one little thing, what we've just been talking about. One of the problems the industry has is almost every intermediary running a big pitch sends a pricing template to agencies, which is based on a labor model. So that has to change. And if you're brave enough as an agency, you either refuse to complete it or you certainly provide an alternative. But I would encourage all the agents.
Have you refused in the past?
Yes. Yeah.
You do?
Yeah, and guess what? If the client really wants you on the pitch, you are not going to be kicked out. And frankly, if they kick you out, it's win-win, because you were never seriously
going to waste your time.
Just save yourself some money. Yeah, so I'd encourage everybody to do that. But sorry, getting back to your question.
Can I have a call out? Bravo.
Oh, great. So sorry, back to your question. So yes, two parts to this. I think when it comes to new business, and we have talked about this a little bit, so I won't repeat it, but ensuring that whether it's the finance or commercial function, depending on the structure of your agency, they have to be there from the outset, as we said, right? So that you're aligned and you know exactly how you're going to approach the negotiation. But beyond that, in terms of the role that they can play, I wonder how many of the agencies listening in today have a pricing strategy, and I mean genuinely have or better, a commercial strategy of which the pricing strategy is part. And I think far too many of us don't, and that can have many different manifestations. But the very least, let's say, and I'm massively oversimplifying here, but you should be looking at the profile of your clients. Those that are big spenders, those that are offering creative opportunities, those where the partnership is really, really strong, those where it's a little bit more tactical, and understanding, because majority of those clients, let's say in today's world, are still priced using models that we ultimately want to move away from. So understanding the client, really understanding the client, then the approach you take will be different and tailored to that relationship. Then, okay, what is the right time to have that conversation? For new business, it's pretty clear. But for an existing client, that might be the contract's up for renewal. That might be when procurement come and ask you where the next round of efficiencies come from. If it's a 3 or 5 year term, that question is absolutely coming. It might be, think about the inflation that we had in recently. Okay, how are we going to tackle that and secure price increases? But having a really kind of considered strategy that sits behind that is so important. And then from that, you can start thinking about your models, the data you need to substantiate them, and so on and so forth. Because if we think about it, right, clients aren't going to pay more tomorrow for what they get from us today. They will pay differently for something that is truly linked to outcomes and that feels different to them. And that's, for me, is where we win, right? So we have to just be really, really smart. New business is a great opportunity to do that. So when the client wants to buy you, frankly, I think you can put within reason, any kind of model down and have a sensible conversation about it. Moving from a legacy model and a legacy relationship is more difficult, but it has to look and feel different. And for me, it has to be tied back to that value conversation, to outcomes. And that's how you start to move the conversation and ultimately your model and the way in which you're paid away from the more traditional models.
I'm going to step in here, and I'm actually going to just dovetail on the end of what John has said. I actually believe that every agency business should put together a pricing council. So this is a group of kind of the C-suite, which includes centre stage somebody from finance, because it's such an important role. And that makes sure that everybody that comes around that table knows the importance of what pricing means for their business. We're heading into an AI world. We've heard all of these scary things around, what's going to happen to the billable hour and the current model and things that we're working on. And it's going to be absolutely critical that finance have a seat at that table, but as should the C-suite. So a pricing council can be really quick and be reactive around what it is that you need to do to make your business successful in a new kind of world of AI. I know we're going to get to that a little bit later, Tracy, but the world is changing dramatically quick. I'm here in Cannes, and it's all the talk about AI, and it has been for quite some time. But now it's right. How is that going to affect the commercial model? How is that going to now influence pricing? And I had breakfast with an agency this morning that the client said, I'm expecting the 20% year on year for the next 5 years reduction in fees based on the efficiencies you're going to make from AI. That conversation is going to be right across the board.
I think that's true. They are expecting it, right? They're expecting
100%.
Your savings is going to be passed on to us, not that the service will change. Or
absolutely. So without finance taking a seat at the table that says, pricing is going to become really important, defending our positions, what we're doing, how do we move into different models of pricing? The billable hour is certainly going to be a very different beast very quickly.
But it's inserting themselves early on, ideally proactively before you've even got pitches. But you're talking about rather than coming in at the end and trying to kind of work with what you've been given and pricing all that up.
And John said some perfect salient points, but I think the finance should lead that pricing council. They're at the table, they hold the seat, and they invite others to that.
Yeah. Okay.
They also have the ability, the data, the kind of the center stone to kind of bring that back to what do we commercially need. Pricing determines profit. I know it's boring, but at the end of the day, it comes back to a really simple statement, and that lives with finance.
Absolutely.
Can I just add one thing, Tracy, and then I can go on. I think there's also very often when it all comes down to the pricing, or the pricing can cause, because it's never just the pricing, right? But often it could be the beginning of when a relationship ends, is that not enough stickiness was created in that relationship. And when I say that, I mean, when you say yes to a pitch, there needs to be a reason that is beyond I want to get an
they asked we said yes.
No, but there needs to be, okay, I can see myself, I can see this as a strategic partnership for the agency. If we were all thinking that way, then it means that, I don't know, you start working with, and I see this in some cases with clients where they've been sticky relationships for a long time, you can see how having this client can improve also our product and what we do as an agency, because then you start by straight away going we are ready to co-invest in this type of project that is going to make, let's say now there's AI, your advertiser X the best retailer using AI that there is out there. And then there's also skin in the game. There is actual skin in the game in terms of investing in something that is of interest to you and the client as well, which makes that relationship much stickier and harder to just walk away based on cost, but also moves you away from just billing for people. And I see some of this now, but still not enough, where there is that kind of stickiness and partnership on key projects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Tracy, just sticking with that kind of pricing, what sort of tools or frameworks are you seeing work well to support pricing decisions? I mean, obviously your tool is one, but tell us a little bit more.
Well, I'm gonna start
with
the
pitch.
I'm gonna start with the elephant in the room and actually talk about what are the tools that we use to price today in an agency. And this one always never ceases to amaze me, that 90 to 95% of agencies today will be using an Excel spreadsheet with a staff plan on it. They may even be using an Excel spreadsheet, and they might have some outputs and elements, and they could even have some deliverables or things in it, but they're still using an Excel spreadsheet. So coming up with pricing is almost always predominantly an Excel spreadsheet. They then take that into a statement of work, which is in Word, and that'll hold different kind of MSAs and items. So firstly, the tool that you use for pricing, which I think is one of the most important things in the business, is really not fit for purpose. It's manual. There's no automatic version control in it. There'll be lots of people. And typically how we deal with that at the moment is we limit the number of people who can get involved in pricing. We slow it down, and actually that bottleneck to speed. There's another really kind of scary quote that 58% of businesses actually choose the first scope or price that they get for a piece of business because they are coming to you because they want to move quickly. So I think wholeheartedly a little bit of and I'm trying not to pitch at the moment because I have a platform, but the tools that we use in agencies today for pricing are woefully inadequate because it's manual processes and it's certainly not kind of designed for scale, and it's not designed for volume either.
Okay, so you've got a model. What are you looking at in there that's different to what John or Tia could have on their spreadsheet?
Well, I think the thing is that the joy with spreadsheets is that you have clients who like to do things a lot of different ways. So how do you take all of that information, and why do you need it in a platform or a tool to manage? Because you might have some clients who are project based. You might have some clients that are retainers or FTEs. You could have some that are fixed fee. You might even have, heaven forbid, some cost plus. You might have some outputs or deliverables. You might be, there's so many different ways that you could price for a piece of business that personally, I think you need to start to, just like you need a pricing council within your business to think about it and to move models for your business's profitability. I think you then need kind of a tool, or at least something where the single source of truth, so that you can then move clients. How are better ways to do it? What are different places of learning? Because I just don't think the tools are currently fit for purpose.
Mm-hmm. What do you think, Tia? Anything to add on that?
Definitely the fact that the tools are not fit for purpose, but also because they're like very one-dimensional. And what I was saying earlier about the fact that very often these dimensions of what we creating together cannot be taken into account in something like that, because it's very much like, yes, a spreadsheet, which is one-dimensional. But these days, if we take the opportunity of AI properly on board, that's like you can create bespoke like systems and tools very quickly by having elements that are one-dimensional, but also the almost kind of the money come by, which can be brought back to a value that you give to it. And I'll give a very like easy example to understand, right? Like if I'm working with someone as I'm kind of leader, and they come to me and they want to become good at public speaking, right? The first question is, how much do you charge, right, per hour? My answer is, how much do you want to become good at public speaking, right? What's the value that you put on that? And I never give the cost per hour, never. Like I refuse. They can calculate it in the end if they want to, but my answer is, go out and figure out how much this is important to you in terms of the PR that is going to give you, promotion, how much you value that, the exposure that you will get internally, externally. I'm giving that example to show that there's always things that you can use to put a value on something that could feel quite intangible otherwise. Want to become great at public speaking is intangible. What happens when you do that? And what are those things that you get? Now we can put a value on that, and we can go back at putting a system together that has those more tangible elements as well as the more intangible. And there's always a version of that you can create. And of course, it will be very different by industry and by client, to Tracy's point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. We've talked a lot about sort of outputs and thinking in terms of value, etc., rather than just focusing on time. John, back to you. What have you seen? Have you got any successful examples of output type based models linked to business performance? What are you seeing in that space?
I think there's slightly different things. That's not to say, there are certainly output based models in the marketplace where there is an element that's put at risk, if you like, and is linked to pre-agreed outcomes, where the agency ideally stands to gain. If they're only clawing back what they'd ordinarily expect to be paid, that isn't an incentive. So they should be gaining if they meet those pre-agreed performance levels, and obviously they are then penalised if they fail to. So, and those models have been in the market for some time. So I'm not sure. I'm just trying to think if they're in terms of output-based models linked to performance, because that then becomes an outcome-based model, right?
Yeah.
But certainly there are. I think there are increasingly outcome-based models in the market. There's still, I agree with what Tracy said. I still think they're few and far between. Hence why so many of the tools are as they are. We don't have enough tools that are focused on the way in which the industry wants to move. But what I would say, what I do think has changed is whilst the industry has been talking for many, many years about moving away from labour-based pricing, with all the disruption we've been talking about, I think clients now are far more receptive to different models, different ways of doing things, and they almost want to be, first mover advantage, be part of that story with you. So not all clients, and it won't be easy, but I do think there is more opportunity now than there was even, say, a year ago, to have this kind of conversation with a client. And I think they're far more receptive to saying, okay, explain to me how that will work. And so I do think the opportunity is there. We're a long way from it, but we have to move very, very quickly.
Okay. So it's all about AI, isn't it?
And I think also, can you hear me? Sorry.
You've got you, yeah.
Yeah. So, and with AI, actually, what will become more possible is to link very clearly the contribution that you make with every element more clearly than now, right, to the business success. Because until a few years ago, and some clients actually were open to linking some of the business metrics to the contribution from the agency, but there was no direct link, right? You can never say the work I've done, the would brought that uplift in your business numbers at the end of the year. However, that becomes a little more possible now to a degree. And so that's why clients become more and more open to also linking to their own success from a business perspective, not just how successful was the advertising campaign or the marketing side of things, but the actual business.
Yeah. Well, that's amazing how easy those figures are available when both parties want to win an award, right?
Yeah.
There you go. There's a few of those going on this week as well. Yeah. What do you think, Tracy, in terms of AI impacting pricing perception of agency services? What are you seeing there, and what do you think is going to happen over the next, I suppose, 12 to 18 months?
I mean, I think we're going to see a quite a dramatic change. I think, we've kind of in the last 12 months, everybody's stepped into AI as a model that you need to be leaning into for your clients. It's kind of very clear that there's going to be enormous amounts of efficiency from that. So what does that mean? The real question is, and it's an expensive thing to be involved in. So an agency needs to work out how they're going to monetize their AI capabilities. And I think we're going to see kind of a trend and a movement in how we kind of price. And I think it starts off with, AI as a kind of a solution enhancer for the agency. So you've got, the tools that are accelerating tasks and reducing billable hours. So that's hence why you need to be moving to kind of outputs and other ways of kind of working. Then you're going to see it as kind of AI as an operations enhancer. So that means that your reporting is going to get better, your allocation is going to get better, running your business is going to become more efficient. So even then they're going to be wanting to kind of share in some of their efficiency. So once again, that's going to be pushing you towards a kind of a different model. And I think the kind of the mid-mark will be where you're going to need to start to price for these kind of AI outcomes and be confident around those. What are the metrics, kind of various different elements as well. But ultimately, I genuinely believe quite quickly we will be or should be in agency AI package products, where you talk about what it is that you're delivering, you talk about that special sauce that you're moving. I mean, we saw Sir Martin Sorrell come out and say that all of S4 Capital is moving to outputs as opposed to time, and I think that was only a couple of weeks ago. And RGA announced even at the start of last week that they are certainly moving to kind of package products for all of their services around wrapped in AI. And then the final step I kind of believe will be, I run a platform, a SaaS platform, so software as a service, and I actually believe agencies will be delivering AI as a service around kind of innovation. There'll be fees around that wrapped up with other things that they produce, and I
will make the finance people happy for sure.
Well, absolutely,
the recurring revenue.
But I think that finance is absolutely pivotal, as I said, with this pricing council. So, you'll get to the point where you'll have a series of what I would say questions or scenarios that you might go through of what you could deliver for a client. And you may have a intelligent agent that you speak to, and it produces those different scenarios as services, and with a price at the end. I mean, why not? That's kind of, if I look, a long term in advance. I mean, we arrived here on a skateboard today, Tracy, but we're going to be taking off in a rocket ship in I think 18 months, 2 years.
John, exciting or frightening, the AI impact?
Just in terms of what Tracy was saying, that immediately becomes scalable, right? Which is obviously a game changer. Now, I think excited and concerned in equal measure, in truth. This is a huge opportunity for us. But it's not going to be without its challenges and complications. So very excited for the future, but I'd be lying if I said there wasn't some concern as well.
Okay. Before I ask you all the one final question, I failed to say at the start of this, there is a Q&A part in the top of the box. So if anyone wants any questions, wants me to ask any questions of our fabulous panel by the end, pop it in there and I will ask it. But in the meanwhile, one last piece of advice, because I'm conscious of time. Let's start with you, Tia. If you could give agency commercial leads one piece of advice to improve their pricing tomorrow, what would it be?
Counterintuitive, it would be like focus on the relationship building from the beginning, because I think that's something that we leave to kind of client teams. And I think that especially with technology and AI, lots of things will be even more commoditized. Relationships will not. And I think that you'll never regret investing in that, because that's what creates that trust and long-term vision. And then from there, you can work on anything.
Partnership and trading. Tracy, what do you think? What's your piece of advice?
I mean, one of the things that we've been frightened of as a business is changing commercial models. I think with the nature of AI speeding towards us, I think that it's something to be embraced. And I actually think it's a huge opportunity. As John alluded to, the benefits of moving to kind of a solution or output approach to your pricing and pitching is that you're ultimately more scalable. You can optimize your profit margins before you even begin, that you'll have reduced operating expenses. I mean, the time and energy that's spent within finance, replicating hours and making sure you're managing hours right across that business is huge. And of course, the businesses are even more scalable, because at the moment you've got these really key people here in Cannes, all the incredible creative teams. They become more scalable because you're not selling just the time for them. You're kind of putting what they do into kind of solutions and ideas and outcomes. So for me, that whole kind of the superstars becomes even greater. And more to the point, agencies are bought and sold every day, and the businesses start and they grow, and ultimately, I think, for somebody creating an agency, they like to exit, and those agency valuations will be 5 to 10 times more, because they have a productized approach that they're talking about solutions and outcomes. And I think for me, the future is exciting. I've been frustrated for many a moon that we've been so stuck with time and materials and such an input focused way of working. So no, I'm excited for the future. And I think it's all to be embraced.
John, final word from you in terms of some advice.
We as an industry and as agencies have a pricing problem, and to date we largely deal with that by taking cost out of our business. And I think you don't need to be a rocket scientist to realise that
can't go on.
That isn't going to work. That can't go on. So I just think, building on the points what he said, like, we've all got to be a little braver. We've got to start having more value-based conversations with our clients, outcome-based partnerships, if you like. And that is going to take a little bit of bravery, a little bit of discomfort on our part to get there, to convince our clients, and indeed, take some of our internal stakeholders on that journey with us. But to Tracy's point, this is coming like a steam train, and we need to get ahead of it. So I know it sounds a little bit obvious, but we've got to be a bit bolder and a bit braver in embracing this change and pushing for different models.
And it feels to me, listening to you all, that finance leaders are going to play a critical role in that, not just in kind of delivering it, but actually in driving it and driving those conversations, and for the future survival of the agencies.
Yeah, exactly.
And rapidly looking at how the data that you're working with is going to be coming back in to make even better decisions at speed. 100%. Fantastic, brilliant. Okay, I'm looking across that. I think most of the questions that have come up we've actually answered in one way or another, so I'm not going to focus on that, and I am conscious of time. So I'm just going to wrap up by saying thank you so very much to John, to Tia, to Tracy, because it's been fantastic. I don't think an hour can ever do this topic justice, and I feel actually going to be interesting to have the same conversation in a year's time, because I think it will already look incredibly different of the way that it looks right now. So thank you. Really appreciate your time and your insight. Tracy, enjoy Cannes, and the rest of us back to your desks. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.